Hello. We're really excited to be here today to talk about diversity and a source of talent you might not have considered. I'm Chanda Jackson, Director of the Global Cybersecurity Planning Office at RBC and Canadian Co-Lead for Women in Identity. I'm humbled to be here with my colleagues today, Nicole, Kate, and Thomas, and they'll introduce themselves. Nicole, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Nicole Landry. I am the Director of IAM Business Analysis at RBC, and I'm also one of the Canadian co-leads for Women in Identity, which is a non-for-profit driving digital identity solutions that considered to be built by everyone for everyone.
Thank you so much. And Kate?
Hello, my name is Kate Schleifer. I am the Chief Revenue Officer at Abliminal.
And Thomas.
Hello, everyone. Thomas Davies. I'm a partner with the cybersecurity practice of KPMG in Canada.
Thank you. And today we're here to talk about neurodiversity and the roles neurodivergent individuals can play in the workforce. Starting off, Kate, can you tell us a bit about what neurodiversity is?
Sure, absolutely. So basically, neurodiversity refers to the differences across human brain makeup. So basically, people who have brains that function differently than the majority of the population. So we see this every day. So examples that you might be familiar with are like dyslexia, dyspraxia, autism. The autism spectrum disorder is a huge one. ADHD, so attention deficit hyper disorder. People with high sensitivity, SPD, which is sensory processing disorder, and kind of all of these brain variances that present differently in different people. So that's a good example, or those are great examples of people who fall under neurodiversity.
Thank you for that, Kate. If I were to speak to my own experiences, and I think that I can probably speak for a lot of people here, I often think of autism as looking a certain way, and I honestly associate it with certain behaviors or traits, when there really is a spectrum. But it's not just the spectrum of what autism looks like for individuals with ASD. It goes way beyond that. Can you elaborate a little bit, Kate?
Sure, absolutely. So we'll be sharing a comic in the resources after our discussion today. But I have a great comic that I use as a resource at our company to kind of explain like what is autism, and it's by this great artist who identifies as autistic as well, or an individual with autism. Their name is Cy Pops, and they do these cool cartoons. And so I think what happens often when we think of autism spectrum disorder, we think of it as a line. And so there's this idea that, you know, you're either more autistic or less autistic, and it's this like sliding scale. But really, when you think about autism, it's not like that at all. And so this comic likens it to like an autism soup. And so you have all these individuals have different traits and different kind of amounts of each of these traits in their own individual soup. And so some of those ingredients might look like repetition. They might be nonverbal. They might be semi-verbal. They might have routines or body movements, or they might have sensory differences. So when we think about individuals with autism, there's not one size kind of fits all. It's all these different traits that can be present or not present in individuals with autism. And so it's like a recipe. Much like everyone in the world, everyone has their own uniqueness, and that is also the same for those who have autism as well.
Thank you, Kate. We really appreciate that, because when I think of things as a spectrum, it's usually on a line, but this is not necessarily like an X or an XY. It's a universe of dimensions that we don't always think of.
Absolutely.
So we really appreciate that insight. So we've been excited to talk about this for a while, and the idea actually came off of a book recommendation. Kate, I think you were the one that kind of started it, and subsequent gifting of the book, and now we look forward to sharing it with others. But Naoki Higashida's The Reason I Jump, and it's really an amazing opportunity to learn about what's happening from somebody who actually has autism and who is relaying this through story, and we're able to read about it, and it's translated into many different languages. I understand that this is how things started off, but you actually went way further and held opportunities for the Abliminal employees to learn more about the community. Kate, can you share with us what you did and what the team learned?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll take it back a step, and because we work at a startup, we have a lot of control about setting the tone for our culture. And so one of the things we did when we started the company was to pick 2 sustainable development goals from the United Nations that really were kind of near and dear to us. So one of is number 5, and that's for gender equality, and number 8 is for it's called decent work and economic growth, and that's where kind of neurodiversity fits in. So as part of kind of our culture investment in our company, when April came around, which is World Autism Acceptance Month, we thought it was a great opportunity to talk about neurodiversity to our team. And what we found is that so many of them, I would say the majority, were unfamiliar with the term and what it meant and what it could potentially look like. So as part of this initiative, we invited a consultant, a speaker. Her name is Wanda Deschamps. She's local to us here, who identifies as a woman with autism. She was diagnosed when she was 47 years of age. She has 2 sons who are also on the spectrum. And she promotes this idea of autism awareness. And so we had her in, we had a talk with the company about what is neurodiversity? What can it look like? Because it takes many shapes and forms. How can we accommodate as a company? And then really the point of it was to open up a dialogue. So create an awareness, talk about it. And as part of doing that, we were able to create a safe space for our employees to understand and, potentially identify. And so as part of that, we had one employee who identified on the call that she has ADHD, and she didn't realize that was part of that kind of autism soup, and she didn't realize that puts her in the same space as someone with neurodiversity or someone who is neurodivergent. And that's one thing I forgot to mention earlier. When we talk about the general population, they're neurotypical, and for the majority of the population, and anyone who's maybe outside of that boundary or who thinks differently, they're a neurodivergent. So we had one who said, yeah, I have this and I identify in this space. And then we had another employee who was asking questions about well, how does one become diagnosed or get this diagnosis, and kind of what does that process look like? Because I feel this a lot of what you're talking about speaks to me as an individual. And so I think, the beauty of that is that we were able to have these conversations, create an awareness, and, that benefited people who really felt like maybe they belonged in that space, but also for the people who were neurotypical, they had an awareness of okay, how can I support these individuals? How do I potentially, change my dialogue with them so that we're connecting and working better. So just those kind of things. And I think it created a great, as I said before, a safe space for everyone to understand and support in our business.
Thank you. I feel like that really ties back to the last section where we were talking about, all of the different things that we could be and how things are not just on a spectrum, but there's the soup. And it's interesting when we look at little ones, like a little one in my life, and who has ASD, and we'll go somewhere, and it somehow comes up at some point in time, like at school or whatever, and sometimes the conversation is, well, she doesn't seem to have autism. It's like, well, she does. She really struggles with things that might be a lot easier for other people. So just being mindful and educating people is a great opportunity to help us all remember what others might be struggling with or going through. So thank you for that. And Thomas, it sounds like KPMG has done some really great things too. Would you like to talk about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So first, I'd like to build off Kate's point around this idea of minority of the populace, with identifying on the spectrum. You might think that that's a small percentage, but there's actually 6 million adults in North America alone that would identify as being on the spectrum. You imagine 6 million is not a small number. That's quite considerable. And some believe that there's many as 1 in 6 who are neurodivergent. Likely gone undiagnosed for the reasons we've talked about, for not being aware. People are being diagnosed much later. And one of the things we have to be careful of as a group is that we don't think that this is a quiet minority or a small minority. And in that, there is this great opportunity. So in cybersecurity, we constantly talk about this cybersecurity skill gap and how there's hundreds of thousands of unfilled jobs, and we're constantly looking for these great people. Well, 80% of those individuals who identify on the spectrum are either unemployed or underemployed. So you imagine of those 6 million adults who identify as on the spectrum, even if we were able to unlock 10% of those from a potential standpoint, we effectively remove the understaffed issue in cybersecurity. And it's been proven many times over that they have an absolute propensity to be exceptional in our field of cybersecurity, in data, and analytics, and analysis, in intelligent automation. It's just a group that we are not tapping into. So we've identified, obviously, this is a problem. It's not just KPMG, obviously, it's many others, but where we looked at it and said, could we hire 4, 5, 6 individuals to try this out? It's a very dangerous approach to take. It's very difficult to take, because you really don't have a clear understanding of how to do this. You really have to tap into experts. So as big as a firm as KPMG is, we still go to experts in this space who work with thousands of individuals to really gather information in terms of what best practices we can engage. What I love about the cybersecurity industry in general is that we're a group of collaborators. We've always talked about, just keeping the bad folks away and sharing information. Anytime something bad happens, we all hop on a phone, get a debrief. How do we help each other out? We don't want to see each other step on the same problems, the same landmines. So really, this is a topic that should be really open sourced, openly shared. And so the work done with KPMG in North America is really focused on access to experts in this field who can share with us this information and allow us to really have a positive experience and create an environment that is developed for these individuals to excel. And I think the most important part of that is we really need to understand that, the population that is neurotypical trying to solve this problem is kind of like you kind of taking attempts in the dark. It's very difficult because we don't understand the approach, because again, we're not living it. So to have a lived experience and to share that lived experience, and I think that's why that book, The Reason I Jump, is so powerful, is you are given at least a glimpse and some understanding, and it's put in a way that I can understand, or I can at least understand better, which is so much more powerful. So these KPMG initiatives around really bringing in experts who can help with IT-based instructions, soft skill development, job search assistance, placement, and then on-the-job coaching. It doesn't just start at, hey, let's just, give people noise-canceling headphones. And while that's important, it really has to start at, the skills development phase all the way through on-the-job coaching phase. It's got to be full life cycle. Otherwise, we're just going to, rotate folks in and out of these programs with very little success. So yeah, I've been proud of the work that I've read that KPMG has completed on this topic. And obviously, it's one that is openly shared. And it's one that we hope to develop as a community together, not competing for talent, this is not a social issue either. This is a business issue that we've continually brought up at the cybersecurity level. And we just have this incredible untapped talent that we need to find a way to engage.
We've looked at what it means to be neurodivergent. We've looked at, where we can bring people in. But I think we have to go one step further and look at inclusion. So, Nicole, you're really known as a champion for inclusiveness. Can you help us understand what inclusion means to you?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think we've touched on it quite a bit already. Is throwing around the word of creating a safe space and environment, which I generally think and believe is key. And what that breaks down to is embracing differences, embracing how diverse humans are, allowing us to show up to work as our true authentic self, not being asked to, in a sense, fit into a mold or a box. I think it's really seeking to build representation for all in a way that adds value, but doesn't point out our differences to further silo groups of individuals, but rather bring us together to celebrate, to grow, to understand, to appreciate even, to help advocate even for one another and allowing differences of thoughts or views, and that, we all deserve a seat at the table. I think also, about how enriched we become when we are inclusive. How does that translate into our everyday life or even our work life? Even just how employee engagement can be enriched by a true sense of involvement and how that may help drive a more meaningful work and higher morale and a sense of belonging. If I even kind of take a step back a little bit and think about it in my current role as a leader, my focus on inclusion also involves me understanding the differences within my team and that we are all differently abled, really. Fostering an environment that allows to challenge the status quo with diverse perspectives. As leaders and managers, I really think and believe it starts with us as well. We need to learn the styles and capabilities of our staff, encourage this, and further build plans that work for each of them. It doesn't necessarily force an expectation that they need to all be the same, think the same, have the same skill set to be successful in the role. But I think even if we break that down, what makes a good employee is not a one-size-fits-all approach. And we've heard that kind of one-size-fits-all reference already that doesn't work. But I guess, to further end my rant there, I think, I can, certainly show how inclusion is something that's very important to me, and I'm sure all of us as well. But I would challenge companies to ask themselves, are we doing enough, or have we just done the bare minimum to include ourselves in this conversation, in the community of diverse thought driving the discussion around diversity and inclusion? And then I think really the answer breaks down to we can always do more. We can continue to seek change and further diverse a state of inclusion. So that's really, in a nutshell, what I would say inclusion means to me. And I think even just the areas of focus as well, we still have a lot to move towards.
Thank you, Nicole. Really appreciate that. So it is something we talk about a lot where, we not only want to bring people in, but we want to make sure that they can be their true authentic selves when we bring them into the group and share all of their wonderful ideas that make everything very amazing. So I guess, Kate, building on that, when we're looking at neurodivergent individuals, what can we do to drive inclusion when we bring them in?
Great question. So I think in terms of bringing them into company, making it seem like a welcome, accessible space for them, you can first of all, there are companies out there that you can work with who will guide you and set you on those first steps. And I think, again, we're going to potentially provide those resources at the end of this for people to access, because there are people who have done this, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. But in terms of just general inclusiveness for neurodivergent individuals, like this idea of like, what's the first step when they're looking for a job? Well, they'd write you look at job descriptions, right? And so at that immediate step, you can rewrite them in a way that's accessible. So oftentimes when you're looking on LinkedIn or a website for postings, it's a big block of information, and then they're asking for skills that are required. And I think for a lot of people who are on the spectrum or who are neurodivergent, it's black and white, and there's not a lot of gray area. So if they're looking at a list of requirements and they're not able to say, I have access to all of those, or I can check mark all of those off, then they feel like that's inaccessible for them because they don't meet all the exact requirements. I think there's you can also consider like how you hold interviews. So for a lot of people who are on the spectrum or who are neurodivergent, having a face-to-face interview is a non-starter. It's scary. They're uncomfortable with that. So if you could do a telephone interview, or maybe telephone is difficult, so you'd be able to type out questions and then have them respond to that. I think that's an easier way for that. The idea of like a handshake, which I think is like pretty normal in our society, right? Like oftentimes people will say, oh, they had a weak handshake, or they didn't, their handshake wasn't great. And I think that has been something that's been kind of telling in the past of like, potentially representative of what this person is like. Some people who are neurodivergent don't like touching other people, so that's again a non-starter. We talked about before, like having remote workspace. Maybe they don't want to come into an office. So I think working with companies who can kind of guide you and give you these very easy things to do to make it accessible to them is a great place to start.
And maybe if I can just jump in, Kate, I was made aware that you also do committee-based hiring panels. Can you talk a little bit about some of the work you're doing on that side in terms of identifying that the right folks are at the table?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that we do here at Abliminal is as Thomas mentioned, we do committee hire. So what that looks like is, when we interview someone who we'd like to bring onto the team potentially, we do committee hire. So we have kind of a committee that's representative of our company. So, it'll be a mix of males and females from different ethnic backgrounds, from that maybe work in different spaces within the company. So you might have someone from sales, you might have someone from engineering or marketing on the call. And also, maybe a senior person, and some people, we've even allowed for some of our interns to be part of that call. And I think because everyone has a different, has had their own path and journey in life, everyone has different experiences that can help you determine like, is this a good fit for our company? Why do I feel this way? And it also allows that individual who's interviewing to see that this is a company that really feels good about having everyone at the table, people having a say, and seeing that there is diversity and inclusion within our company from the very first step. So from that interview process, and that everyone's opinion is heard. And so I think that's a really cool thing that we do here.
That's really exciting. I don't think I've ever thought of looking at it from that perspective. I've always thought, the more people, it tends to get a bit more nerve-wracking. But you're right. If we can see ourselves in the interviewers and maybe potentially see how we could fit in the company, that would be a lot more comfortable. So thank you for that. Something new I'm definitely going to try going forward. Thomas, you had another point that you made. So, say say noise is a thing for me, and it kind of is, and there's a lot of construction outside. But you know, if noise canceling headphones are something that an individual would need, how do we have them perhaps declare so that they can go forward and get headphones?
I appreciate that, Chanda, and you know, we've been chatting about inclusivity and identifying versus not having to identify, and what is the bias there. And we also talked a little bit earlier about so many people who haven't you know, self-identified, even though they might be in that neurodivergent side. You know, what we found is that by providing accessible options to everyone, so that they do not have to self-identify, it actually helps the broader group as well. So to your point, you know, you're dealing with construction, it's nice to have a set of noise canceling headphones. So instead of us, you know, asking each individual person, do you identify in, you know, this bucket? We can just say, hey, we have options for you where you can have access to things like, you know, would it be helpful to have a sensory room in your workspace, noise canceling headphones, access to resources, technical and digital enablers, the ability to communicate differently. These might be some things that many people want. And so, you know, again, by being more accessible, we actually wind up supporting a greater group of our employee base and create a much more positive work environment. You know, through that, you know, I talked a little bit about some of the work we've done with experts outside of KPMG to really help us build. There's an organization I was alluding to called Melwood, which is an organization that is predominantly made up of those that identify either on the spectrum, or perhaps they're veterans, or other people who, you know, oftentimes are in that underemployed or unemployed vocation. And, you know, what we found out of that is really what they're asking for. I think a lot of those components we would like to have not just access to them ourselves, but I think everybody would like to have, or at least the option. And I think that the positive from that is that it takes away that need to self-identify. So if we can, you know, if we can find a way to outline what would be some of these components, and I won't pretend to know them all. There's many, and we can provide resources after this. But if we can present these options to our employee base, it makes them feel like they are included, and that it's not, again, it's not a social impact. It's not an accommodation they're making for an individual. It's, listen, this is what we have because this is what our workforce looks like, and this is what, you know, we want to enable. We want to enable the best. I think we've all said it at this point. I'll say it now. I think everybody else has said it up to this point. We want to bring our best selves, our full selves to work. And so why not give everybody this access? So I think, you know, again, going back to the comment about, hey, let's just try to do this under a pilot program for a couple of folks and we'll make it a social initiative, is you're leading down the wrong path. What you want to think about is this is a business crucial issue. We need to talk to the experts who, you know, have seen this through and through, who have firsthand opinion, who have feedback from the individuals in these programs that can, you know, educate us. And we can, you know, leverage these best practices across all of us. So I would say that first and foremost, if we're having to self-identify, it's, you know, we're already at a point of bias. And, you know, Kate was talking about the job description bias. You know what, it reminded me of the resume reviewing bias and some of that work that the Women in Identity had been talking about, and some of the technology around that. Not to put you on the spot, gang, but do you have some comments about, I would love to hear about some of the revenue, or the resume rather, bias that comes potentially through job postings. When we write a job description, the resumes we get often have a bias. Do either one of you want to talk to that?
Nicole, do you want to talk about it, and I can tag on if needed?
Yeah, I just want to maybe unpack that question a little bit, if that's okay. So kind of looking at, you know, the biases that obviously are potentially written into, you know, job postings or what we're looking for from a resume. Did I understand that correctly, Thomas?
Well, even when we get the resume, right? Like if we can even get the job description to be unbiased, then we get a resume, and then it might have a bias in terms of the way they put the resume together, or a cultural background or whatnot that might.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I think in the past, or, in other conversations, we've kind of discussed, options of when reviewing the resumes, removing certain information, whether that be, their address or name, right? And looking at it from that perspective, that can kind of remove potential unconscious biases or biases that may kind of come within reviewing that. I kind of going to navigate a little bit away from that, but I often get a lot of conversations or even just chats that I have with people that instantly, when they see a resume or a job posting, they're like, oh, I don't meet all of this criteria, right? And I know we probably have heard that quite often, but you think to some of the points that have, been discussed through our conversation already, how we really are potentially losing out on great talent because the way that we, write our job postings or some of the details that we're seeking, when maybe we could help get someone to there, right? Like maybe they're at a point and, there's a little bit more that maybe we have to do, but ultimately they could be a great fit for the position. So I always encourage people, like, don't get too caught up in some of the details that you might be missing. Think about how that, relates to a transferable skill and bring that forward. But I know I'm kind of navigated away from your true, question here. But I think ultimately those are some of the opportunities that we've discussed in the past about removing those unconscious biases, again, of just, removing the name, removing the address or location of the individual when getting the pool of resumes to look through. And I don't know if I'm missing one, but I'm going to kind of rely on you if I've kind of skipped anything that you may want to add as well.
No, that's great. So we had looked at, there was a company in the UK that was actually accepting resumes on behalf of groups so that they could essentially remove all this. And, the name, the address, because your neighborhood might tell something, or even just the location of past employers. So many companies are global, and you could work for one company and be in Canada or the US or India or London or just anywhere in the world. But just removing it, so you're actually only looking at the experience. And, if that's not an option for you when you're looking at resumes or when you're going out to hire somebody, you could also just have somebody on your team pull off the information so that you're looking at the candidates. And it's true. Like, I've personally showed up for many interviews where they say, like, oh, you weren't what we were expecting. And it's like, oh, okay. That's an interesting lead off. But, that interview, from my perspective, it's already gone. I'm like, oh, okay. Now I'm nervous. Now I'm wondering what you were expecting. So removing identifiers so that people have, everyone has an equal opportunity.
Yeah, and I would also add on to that too, because I have a background in academia. I think sometimes, your education as well, like if you have a BA, that's great. The university or college as an identifier as well can be something that holds a tremendous amount of bias. So that's something that's helpful to remove as well.
I think it's interesting. I know I can't speak to everybody's background, but I'll at least speak to my own. But, I didn't start in cybersecurity. So even somebody took a chance on me where I had a relatable skill and I was able to lateral into something I was very passionate about. I absolutely love the field, but, I needed a lot of coaching and peers and, bored a lot of great brains to really develop my career. And I think about that in regards to, what are we missing on the neurotypical versus neurodivergent side, where, we've got it in our heads that this is what a resume should look like, and we're laser focused. Do they have X, Y, and Z? Or otherwise we move on. I don't know that we've identified, how we're even removing that bias in terms of, well, maybe somebody is presenting that information in a different way that we can't see. Even out of this discussion, it's making me think about it more. It's sitting heavy with me. What have I potentially missed along the way in a new hire, new recruit, where I've at least pulled away the, hey, if they're passionate and they've got a good head on their shoulders, then we can teach them the cyber side. Again, the benefit of the collaboration in this community is wonderful, but I do wonder what the next step is in terms of how do we look at, again, the job description thing, the resume bias thing. Yeah, how do we support that further? So I'm the wheels are turning in my head as we talk, which is always why I love chatting with this group on these topics. But I think it's something that needs more research, more forthcoming information, and maybe if somebody has some insights, we'd love to hear that.
I do love chatting with this group because, we are always looking for the next step. And, in this conversation itself, we've gone from what is the definition to where can we be and what is the future vision. And so far as, we talk about, like, if I say something wrong, please call me out, because unless we talk about it and unless we're willing to make those mistakes and be corrected, we're not going to move anywhere. But I think of some of the small I've learned about, like, microaggressions, in everyday life. For example, we just had Halloween. Like, if the child has ASD, have them carry a different colored pumpkin so that that they don't have to say trick or treat. But really, just if they show up and they're there on the day, send them along and they're doing great. So don't make them self-identify when we don't have to, and just let them be a part of the group. It's just supposed to be a fun day. But kind of starting to wrap things up, Nicole, we want to build better products. How does this help us do that?
I mean, yeah, I think if we really kind of look at it from that perspective, I think even just, to touch on, Thomas, what you said about where you actually started, I'm also somebody that, didn't come from the cybersecurity background, but was given the opportunity. And, I'm appreciative of it because I love the space so much. But in the area that I'm at right now, I think of, imagine the use cases we miss without a diverse team, the solutions we implement that possibly miss a large group of end users because they were not included in the actual delivery or as we keep hearing, or as I've said before, had a seat at the table to allow that diversity of thought. I really think it's not one side that benefits when we consider inclusivity, or even just, to the topic at hand, adding neurodiverse individuals to our teams. I think we can all benefit, and furthermore, inclusion deepens creativity and aids in groundbreaking innovations. And we need to kind of navigate away from, I think, the thought of viewing being different as problematic or wrong, and kind of work towards understanding this topic, which is amazing because, we're here, learning about it. But I think to Thomas and Kate, you've mentioned, we need to kind of continue to educate ourselves, but leverage the best practices, leverages the professionals that are out there to kind of, bring this into our spaces and those looking to, build programs to allow for that inclusion. And then I think, thinking about it, in working in digital identity, I laugh because we often revert to the IAM framework that the right user has the appropriate access to technology resources. But what if we took a different viewpoint that also considers the identity linked to the individual themselves? In the case of how can we consider, like in that case, how can we not consider how diverse individual identities can be? Who somebody or how somebody identifies themselves. Kind of further incorporate that into our industry and what we deliver. For example, how someone is authenticated. Our current practice is really inclusive for all. I kind of wanted to just mention too, I was reading in the Harvard Business Review, and I'm not sure if you guys have also read this article, but it was about neurodiversity as a competitive advantage. And hopefully we can share that as well. And in there, they mentioned the easiest to expand employment in areas, it's easiest to expand employment in areas such as software testing, business analytics, and cybersecurity, in which tasks are a good fit for a neurodiverse talent. And I think even, Thomas, you mentioned that as well. But certainly we can see the benefits to inclusion and how it drives overall thought leadership towards what we deliver. But what that means is we actually need to provide the space for these opportunities. And I believe, the innovations will be greater and the possibilities endless if we consider to kind of bring this all together.
As we look to wrap up our time, Thomas, any parting words or thoughts?
Well, I'm gonna build off something Nicole said, which I really love about the identity and the access, and thinking about the identity at the other end. I love the idea of identity and access from a technology standpoint, but identity and access as a philosophy as well. I mean, if we're not best suited to really understand identity and access of individuals, then who is? And I'll say, this panel was really put together from a statement, or my interest in this panel was put together by a statement from you, Chanda, which is, let's be bold. Like, let's stop talking about it. Let's take action. Let's share that information together. Let's just be successful together. It doesn't have to be a competition, who's doing it better, where. It has to do with, let's just make this change as a business critical issue to resolve a problem that we have existing today.
There's so much talent that as a whole we're overlooking, and I really hope that we, take away from today's discussion that we should really tap into it. And, I know we'd all love to answer any further questions. Kate, any parting wisdom from you?
I guess what I would say is, when you allow for a variety of brain makeups to flourish, and you support that in a workplace, it only allows for a greater workplace for everyone, right? So that idea of these employee accommodations, when you do that, it looks like a best practice for everyone. It's not those individual groups. Like, when you open this up and you create awareness and you educate, then it just makes a better space for everyone. And so, I think, as you said, these individuals have so much to offer. I think we're missing out on it. And all you need to do is take those first few steps and leverage the information that's out there, the specialists who work in this field on the daily, and just, start implementing very small things, and you'll see that it benefits your entire organization. It's not isolated to just those who identify. Everyone is better for this idea of inclusion.
Thank you, Kate. Nicole?
I think at this point, I just echo what, Thomas and Kate have said, and just, continue to challenge the status quo and be the change that we want to see.
Thank you. So, in closing, I'd like to wrap up by saying we have a business need, we have a driver, we have talent, we have a real opportunity. But on the social side, representation matters. It's important that we all see ourselves in someone at work. And this is providing, a different lens on representation. So, not only would you be filling the business need, you're giving somebody an opportunity that they might not otherwise have. You're making a direct impact on them, their family, and those around them. But you're also making a direct impact on, the parents, the teachers, the little ones today with ASD, who, maybe have already been told you're not going to be able to do anything in the workforce. You're not going to have these opportunities. So, you're also creating hope, and we really appreciate that. So with that, thank you so much, and feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions.